When ordering an Uber, it is essential to know that the person you're getting into the car with is actually your Uber driver. Today we look at 3 Uber horror stories. Welcome to Creep Source. Last night I was working late, so I took advantage of my company's guaranteed ride home program for overtime works and called an Uber. I was initially surprised when my driver pulled up in an unexpectedly nice vehicle, a Mercedes GL 450. I don't Uber that much, but when I do, I don't think I've ever gotten anything other than a Prius. This was next level. There was bottled water, chargers for every type of phone, and even some snacks. I actually checked my app to make sure I didn't request an Uber Select or something by accident, but it was just ordinary Uber X. I was thinking maybe I got lucky. The driver was an Asian girl, Chinese maybe. I know there's a stereotype that Westerners can't tell the age of Asians, but I honestly couldn't say if this woman was in her early 20s or early 50s. She had that timeless fresh Asian look, like the actress from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. She was very pretty, but there was something anomalous about her. Normally, I don't make chit-chat with my Uber drivers, but it was a 45-minute ride home, and after half an hour in silence, the overall oddity of the situation eventually overcame my reluctance. "This is a really great car," I tried. The woman smiled. "Thanks, I like it too." I was racking my brain for a follow-up, but everything that popped into my head sounded like I was some kind of stalker. There was another few minutes of silence before I tried again. "So, how do you decide to be an Uber driver?" "Oh, it's kind of a long story," she responded. "We have some time, I think." The woman looked at me in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were incredibly piercing, as if she was taking measure of my soul. Then she turned back to the road. "Actually, originally my husband was an Uber driver. He was a professional driver in China, which was a high-status job, working for government officials and high-profile foreign visitors. When we immigrated here, he got his commercial license and signed up with Uber. He drove Uber Black and only had commercial clients. Business was good, and he bought this car for that." "Oh, that's cool," I added. I wasn't sure where this was going. But when Uber got popular, there were more drivers, and then they introduced Uber X. Then anyone could drive. You didn't need a commercial license or anything. You didn't need to be a professional driver at all. For a while it was still okay, but over time there were fewer and fewer requests for the high-end Ubers. He thought he could make it up in tips, but at first Uber didn't have tipping, and even when they added it, most people didn't tip. No one cared about the quality of service or the professionalism. On top of not tipping, people were so disrespectful. They would get the car dirty, come in with their dirty shoes or reeking of cigarette smoke, and worst of all, people would downrate him for no reason, just if they were having a bad day or maybe they just didn't like Chinese. It was humiliating for him. His income kept going down. Eventually, he couldn't even pay for our house. We had to move into an apartment, and even then it was a struggle. Eventually he was so ashamed that he took his own life. I was stunned. I didn't know what to say. I was wishing I had just kept my mouth shut. Luckily we were almost home. That's really tragic. I'm so sorry for your loss. Since his passing, I've taken over for him, driving on his account. I go out of my way to provide the best possible experience, and then, if a passenger still decides to give me a bad rating or no tip, I remember them. I know where they live or where they work, and later, I make them pay for what they did to my husband. I was still processing the full import of this when the car came to a stop in front of my house. "Here you go. I hope you had a good trip." I thanked her and carefully exited the vehicle. As I entered my house, she drove away. My Uber app pinged in my pocket asking me to rate my driver. My entire body went cold with fear. I gave her 5 stars and $20. I hope it was enough. I'm an Uber driver. Last week I picked up someone Inhuman. I'm in college in a pretty rural part of the country. I won't get more specific than that. The important part is about halfway through this past semester, I was running pretty low on cash. I searched out a job on campus for a while, but I just couldn't bring myself to work retail or be at a desk answering phones all day. I only decided to drive for Uber because I could make my own hours, and basically work as little or as much as I wanted. Plus, most of the time my passengers were students, so it allowed me to meet people on campus I might not have met otherwise. For a while, it was actually a really good gig. There were some late night puke rides and even a couple drunkenly handsy guys in my front seat, but overall I felt like I was making good money and not really working too hard, until last week. I didn't have any plans for last weekend, so I decided I would go out and be a good Samaritan, driving drunk kids home safely. I knew I'd make good money because there'd be a surplus of people who needed a reliable ride, so I didn't really have anything to lose. I would wait in the McDonald's parking lots and read my book or play on my phone while waiting for someone's ride request to pop up on my screen. I would pick them up, bring them home, drive back to the parking lot, repeat. I started driving around 11 PM and planned on finishing up around 3. Since most rides were just going between buildings on campus, I knew I'd be able to get a lot of drives within that 4-hour period. Everything went pretty smoothly, a couple of close calls with vomit and my leather interior, but no true disasters. I was getting tipped pretty well despite the inebriation of the passengers I was picking up, and everyone, for the most part, was really friendly. At about 1, I got a notification that someone had requested a ride. The pickup spot was really close, one of the old apartment buildings about 10 blocks away from the lot I'd been idling in. Looking closer, I noticed where the ride was heading. It was some random address a few towns over, much farther than I'd gone with any of my drives that night. In the moment, this actually made it more appealing to accept, since obviously the longer the ride, the more I get paid. It didn't seem like a sketchy area or anything like that, so I accepted the request and turned over the engine. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I realised I'd been sitting there reading my book for almost half an hour. I guess it had been a slow point of my night, and I turned around to see if there were a lot of other cars around. Weirdly, everything was off. The street lights, the window lights of any nearby businesses, even the McDonald's inside lights were off, although I swore the one I was parked at was 24-hour. I brushed it off, figuring everything was just finally closing up for the night, and that I wasn't usually out late enough to see the street lights being turned off. It only took me 4 or 5 minutes to get to the address where I was supposed to pick this guy up. He didn't have a profile picture, but his name was Mark. It also seemed like he didn't have any rider ratings, meaning his account was either brand new or he just never used it. I made a right turn onto the street where the address was located, and as I looked around I started to think maybe someone pranked me. The street was completely residential, which wasn't out of the ordinary for the area, but all the houses were completely dilapidated. Graffiti, broken windows, boarded up front doors. I couldn't imagine anyone possibly living here, let alone having a party. My house hunting was interrupted by the sound of my phone telling me I was approaching the destination on my right. I looked down the street, and I could just barely make out the shape of who I assumed the person was I was picking up, standing on the front lawn. As my car inched closer, I could see that he was really just standing there. It didn't look like he had a phone in his hand or anything. Even stranger, he was waving. Not waving at me. My car wasn't even close enough for him to be doing that. He was out on the lawn, facing across the street, just waving at nothing. I really thought once I approached the final destination I would see some newer, fancier house built on the street that I'd just never seen before. I was very wrong. The house I approached, which was behind the lawn my passenger was standing on, looked almost more broken down than the rest. The roof had completely caved in and you could see the old rooms through broken parts of the wall. None of the windows had any glass, and the front door had been completely ripped off its hinges. Wind ripped through the frame, shaking the entire house. It was definitely not somewhere livable. I stopped the car right in front of the lawn, which is when I finally got a chance to focus on the man's frame for a brief moment. He was tall, lanky even, and had clothes on that didn't seem like they fit or matched. His pants cut off around his mid-calf and hugged his legs extremely tight, while his t-shirt moved with the wind around him, hardly touching his body. He had no coat on despite it being winter, but wore a fedora. His shoes were absolutely huge, looking almost disproportionate to his body. His face looked relatively normal, like a thin man in his early 30s. His cheekbones were very pronounced, and his eyes sunk hollowly back into his skull. He was still waving, but now his eyes shifted focus to me. "Hi, here for Mark?" I rolled down my window about halfway. "Yes," the man started, ceasing his waving. His hand hung motionless in the air for a moment before returning to his side. He didn't break eye contact with me until he took a step to open the car. Normally when people are taking an Uber alone, they just sit up in the front seat, but Mark moved to the back door and sat on the rear right seat, diagonal to me. For some reason this sent a shiver up my spine, knowing that he could basically just watch me driving without me noticing. After directing my phone to start the navigation, I decided to start a conversation. "So, what brings you out tonight?" I looked at him in the rearview mirror. Our eyes met.
I met some friends,"
he muttered. His voice was sharp and gravelly, and by his tone I could tell he didn't want to talk. Usually when I drive for Uber I don't turn on my radio since I know many people have strong feelings about music. I let him have his space and drove in silence for a few minutes, almost forgetting he was there until his voice piped up from the back seat.
"Hey, do you mind if I eat?"
I thought about it for a moment. Normally I would say no, but for some reason I just felt like I really didn't want to make this guy mad. He was bigger than me after all, definitely big enough to overpower me. As a relatively small woman, I knew I needed to be cautious about who I was angering. No, that's fine. I saw him nod in the rearview mirror before pulling up a bag from his feet that I hadn't noticed him having before, and I focused my eyes back on the road as he unwrapped his food. Another minute or so of silence passed, again leaving my mind nearly vacant of his presence. It honestly hadn't even sounded like he was eating anything until the sound of his initial bite brought me out of my mental autopilot. The sound was wet and loud. I didn't even need to look in the mirror to know that something strange was happening, but I was too freaked out not to sneak a glance. I wish I hadn't. When I looked into the rear view mirror, I just saw teeth. Not long, sharp teeth, but normal human ones. Rows of them. His entire jaw had unhinged and expanded to the point where I could see all the way down his throat when he opened his mouth. And I would guess probably 8 or more rows of teeth spread back into his head. Blood dripped down the sides of his mouth down his chin, and he hardly even swallowed his previous mouthful before biting into the next piece. I quickly shifted my gaze back to the road before he could make eye contact with me. I'd forgotten to breathe until that moment, and it took everything in me not to swerve to the side of the road and take off running. I had no idea what to do, so I just kept following the directions. My phone said I only had another 3 or 4 minutes to go until I reached his destination, but now I wasn't even sure if I wanted to go there. I just kept driving. Every time he took a bite, I could hear the sound of blood splattering against a nearby surface. I knew that no matter where I was taking him, I just wanted him out of the car as fast as possible. 2 minutes to go. All the streetlights were still out, and I still hadn't seen a single car since I left the pickup spot. I was praying for someone to just drive by, see me panicked, see what was happening in my car and stop. As I looked out onto further nearby streets, everything looked desolate. There was no one to be seen. 0.5 miles to the destination. My heart was throbbing harder than I'd ever heard it before. I wouldn't let myself look back again, out of fear he would see me. I knew what was happening back there wasn't something I was supposed to see, and I had to just pretend I couldn't. I made 2 more turns until finally I made a right onto the street where the destination was. To my horror, it was the exact same street I'd picked him up on. Same empty houses, same graffiti, same uneasiness. I didn't know how it could be possible. I'd followed the directions perfectly. It was the only thing that allowed me to redirect my focus from my passenger. Sure enough, my navigation ended in front of the same dilapidated house I'd been summoned to. As I screeched my brakes to a stop, I could hear him gnawing on the last bit of something tough. "Here you are," I said, sensing that he was finally still. I let myself glance back in the rearview mirror again. Our eyes immediately met. His lips curled to a smile, exposing his inhuman teeth. He was covered in blood. It dripped down to his neck and onto his baggy shirt, making almost the entire thing wet and stained. His pupils had rolled back, exposing only the whites of his eyes, but somehow I knew he was looking at me. His head seemed huge.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Without breaking the stare, he reached over and pulled open the door handle, shuffling his thin body until he could throw his feet out onto the pavement. Holding the frame of the door, he lifted himself up and out. When the door finally shut, I couldn't help but to watch him move back towards his original spot where he stood. He had such a rickety nature about his movement, almost like he'd never truly learned how to walk. As if by instinct, he stopped in the exact same spot I'd first seen him in, and faced out towards the street. As I accelerated down the road, his bloody gaze followed me through the window. Even after I was far enough to only see him in the rearview mirror, I could tell his stare hadn't broken. He was waving. The next morning I got up to discover that my car had no evidence of him ever being there. No blood, no food, nothing. My Uber app hadn't even recognised that I'd made the drive, which was maybe the worst part. I had no proof that any of this happened. I seriously considered that maybe it was all a dream after all, a product of my long night of driving, but it was just too real. I've had bad drives before, although nothing like this, and normally I would just allow myself to forget about it and move on. But it occurred to me, if he really had ordered a drive with me through Uber, it means he has my phone number. I don't drink as a general rule, but once a month or so I'll go out with friends and binge. My friends and I had a great night at a bar in a city, and they left. I was chatting up a cute guy, so I decided to stay. I went back to his place, post-coitus. Very unsatisfying for anyone interested. I'm ready to head home, so I call an Uber to pick me up. I don't know where I am. I know the city I'm in, but not my exact location. I order the Uber, but it's taking forever. Requesting, so I cancel it and try again. Pretty soon a car pulls up. I drunkenly mumble something like,
"Is this the Uber?"
and I hop in. Mistake. Ubers apparently are supposed to have some kind of marking on the vehicle. The guy pulls away and starts driving. We're chatting. I'm fumbling for a cigarette, and the next thing I notice is that we're heading on the highway, but in the opposite direction of where I thought we needed to drive, and we're going at a solid 90 miles per hour. Then I get a call from my Uber driver. He's there, and I'm not, because I'm in a car with a fucking nutcase. I started texting my friend, frantically counting off mile markers for her. Then I realised that's not going to do jack because she's probably drunk too, so I call 911. But I realise this guy's crazy. He's refusing to let me out of his car, so I've got to do it on the sly. It's been 40 minutes now. I'm terrified. I don't know where I am. I don't know who this is. We're driving at over 100 miles per hour, weaving in and out of traffic. This guy is trying to get me to hang up on my phone call.
Yo, get off the phone. Who the fuck are you calling? Better not be a snitch.
And also smoking pot, so I don't want to do anything that might provoke a violent reaction from him. I start chatting to the 911 dispatcher as if it's my friend, praying that they'll catch on.
Hey girl, it's me. Yeah, I'm with someone right now. We're driving past...
Highway exit.
No, sweetie, it's not my Uber. I thought it was, but it's not. It's a shame you can't come and meet me and bring friends.
Thanks, sweet baby Jesus, the operator catches on. He gets me to stay on the phone while he sends cops, and we develop a code. If I see cops, I'm supposed to casually put my hand out of the window, which looks semi-normal because I'm smoking a cigarette. We pull into some random little housing complex and he busts out some powder and forms 2 lines. I now have confirmation that he does drugs, which means he's probably emotionally volatile. I relay this to the operator in code.
Oh girl, I wish you were here right now. This guy's just busted out the coke. You'd love it. He's taking a really big bump, man.
Pretty soon I can see the lights from the cop car, so I start waving my hand out the window. At this point I don't care if he's onto me or not. I don't know if he has a weapon, but I slump down in my seat just in case things got hot. The cops surround us, get him out of the car, and then, once it's safe, they extricate me as well. They whisk me to the hospital for a drug test and evaluation, and that's where my story ends. On my way to the hospital, as I'm explaining all this to the officer, I found out that of the guy's 40-ish years on this earth, he's been in federal prison for 30 of them for violent offences.